The ground trembled before the sound ever reached him. Dust rose in the distance, a long ribbon of it snaking toward his cabin like a storm with spears. He stepped onto the porch with a rifle in hand and a prayer half finished on his lips. They came fast, painted faces, feathers whipping in the wind, horses breathing fire, 100 Comanche warriors, encircling the house like wolves around a wounded deer. Inside, the girl hadn't said a word since sunrise. She sat in the corner, eyes wide, hands trembling around the piece of bread he gave her. Just a child. Couldn't be more than 15. But even now, he saw the warrior in her jaw, the fire in her silence. The man knew what they saw when they looked at him. A white settler, a thief, a liar. But he also knew what she told him last night before she fell asleep. On his floor, "My father will come. He always does." And now, he had. The silence between them all, man, girl, warriors, was heavier than the sky itself. Tell us where you're watching from before we ride into this twisted tale, and subscribe if you love the West. The town of Dry Willow didn't have much to offer. A lopsided saloon, a church with cracked windows, and a sheriff whose badge was more rust than tin. Most days, wind and dust argued louder than any man. But every so often, someone, would rattle the silence hard enough to leave a mark. That someone was her. She came from the South Hills, barefoot and bleeding. No one saw where she came from exactly, just that she appeared one morning, just past dawn, walking down Main Street like a ghost with a heartbeat. Her hair was long, tangled from the brush. Her eyes, dark as gunmetal, scanned the town like she'd seen it before, maybe in a dream or a warning. A thin scar curved beneath her left eye like a misplaced tear. She limped, badly, favoring her right side. Her dress was torn. She carried no food, no name, and no language the town folks could understand. The children whispered first. Comanche. Wild girl. Stolen girl, maybe. Hexed. Their mothers pulled them away. Their fathers watched from storefronts, with hands hovering over pistol belts. Old man Bricker said she was cursed, said he'd seen eyes like hers once before, after a raid on a Texas cattle run, said those eyes weren't made for mercy, but others weren't so sure. She sat on the edge of town that first week, not moving much, just staring out past the horizon like she was waiting for something. Or someone. Never begged. Never cried. When the store owner left out a crust of bread and a skin of water, she took it with a nod but no thank you. She hadn't spoken a word. Some thought she couldn't speak. Others figured she was just smart enough not to. On the 5th day, Sheriff Albee tried to move her along, said she was scaring folks, said she needed to be with her people. She didn't flinch when he raised his voice, but when he reached for her arm, she grabbed his wrist and twisted it like a boy twisting the head off a bird. Didn't break it, just warned him. He let her be after that. By the 2nd week, she'd become a part of the town's silence, like the bell that no longer rang, or the church pews no one sat in. They avoided her eyes but kept track of her all the same. Still, nobody knew her name. She began sleeping under the hitching post behind the blacksmith shop. Her limp worsened, likely infected, but she never asked for help. The town doctor left out salve in a handkerchief once. The next day it was gone, but no one saw her take it. Then came the rumors. A Comanche raid 3 nights south of Dry Willow. Settlers gone missing. A ranch torched to ash. Some said it was retribution. Others said it was prophecy. When they mentioned the girl, it was in hushed tones and cautious glances. No one had proof, but no one needed it. The girl was the only Comanche face anyone had seen in weeks, and that was reason enough. One evening, while the sun dragged its dying light across the hills, a preacher's wife found the girl kneeling, beside the church well, not praying, just listening. Her hand rested on the stones as if feeling something through them. The woman asked if she needed help. The girl looked up, her face blank but unreadably sad. She pointed to her ear, then shook her head. The preacher's wife understood. Deaf. No wonder the world had gone so quiet around her. But silence isn't the same as peace. She was outcasted not because of what she did, but because of who she reminded them of: the raids, the fears, the land they'd taken and called their own. She was the living thread between two worlds they didn't want to admit still bled into each other. No friends, only whispers. She moved like someone always expecting to be struck, sat with her back to walls, ate quickly, slept lightly, trusted no one, until him. The settler lived a mile outside of Dry Willow, a carpenter, quiet man, widow, lost his wife to fever 2 winters back. Folks said he'd buried a baby too. Nobody saw much of him after that, except when he came into town for nails or tobacco. Never drank, never raised his voice, just lived like the world owed him nothing, and he expected even less. He saw her one evening. She was limping down the road, out of town, slower than usual, her face pale, blood soaking through her dress again. She didn't ask. He just stepped aside, opened the gate, and nodded toward the barn. She hesitated, then entered. It was the first kindness she'd been shown without suspicion attached. That night, while the wind scraped across the plains, the man cooked stew over a fire and offered her a bowl. She ate like someone who didn't know if there'd be a tomorrow. He didn't ask questions. She didn't offer answers. But she looked him in the eye. And that, for her, meant something. She slept in the loft, curled in hay, wrapped in an old wool blanket that still smelled faintly of lavender and rain, his wife's perhaps. He slept with a rifle across his chest, not out of fear, but habit. Morning came with a silence even deeper than usual, until the hooves started, and the earth began to shake. He didn't ask for company. Hadn't in years. The man known only as Jonah lived a mile outside Dry Willow, where the prairie opened up like a wound too wide to stitch. His land was plain, just a one-room cabin, a weathered barn, and a broken fence half swallowed by dust. But it was quiet. And quiet was something he'd come to treat like scripture. When she stepped through his gate that evening, barefoot, limping, silent, he didn't flinch, didn't reach for his rifle, didn't call for help. He simply watched. Her eyes met his. Not with fear, nor plea. Just a tired sort of waiting. Jonah nodded toward the barn. That was all. She slept in hay that night, with moonlight filtering through the slats. He left bread, water, and an old blanket folded at the edge. She didn't touch the blanket until after he left. In the morning, he found her standing near the horse trough, washing dried blood from her leg. The scar on her cheek caught the sunrise. She never looked his way, but he offered his flask of boiled water anyhow. She took it without a word. There was no thanks. There didn't need to be. They lived like that for 3 days, 2 shadows under the same sky, orbiting each other carefully, silently. She never entered his cabin. He never asked why. She moved with caution, every motion guarded, like she still expected to be hunted. But Jonah had known that kind of stillness before, in animals and soldiers, in people who had lost something that wouldn't be returned. He didn't press her. He knew wounds didn't close faster with questions. By the 4th day, he noticed she was limping worse. Infection, likely. She hadn't eaten the bread the night before. He spoke gently. "You'll lose the leg if you let it rot." She looked at him, startled, not by the words, but by the tone. He stepped forward and crouched. "Let me help. Just the leg." Her fingers gripped the hem of her skirt. Her jaw tensed, but after a moment she nodded. He wrapped the wound in silence, cleaned it with whiskey and cloth. She winced but didn't cry. When it was done, he stood and said nothing more. She followed him back to the barn like a shadow drifting behind its source. That night he set a second bowl at the fire. She sat across from him, still no words, but she stayed. The wind changed on the 6th day. Jonah knew weather better than most. You could feel it in the dirt, in the way the birds went quiet. That morning, the sky wore a sickly yellow tinge, and the wind began rolling in from the south, heavy, unnatural. She noticed it too. He found her standing on the rise behind the barn, staring into the distance, not searching, watching. "Expecting someone?" he asked. She didn't answer. Her eyes, though, darkened like a storm cloud rolling over itself. He went into town that afternoon. Supplies were running low, and the fever that had taken his wife long ago had made him cautious about keeping stores. The moment he stepped into Dry Willow, eyes turned. Sheriff Albee leaned on a post, arms crossed. "You seen her?" Jonah didn't lie. "She's resting on my land. I gave her bread and water." "She wasn't armed," the sheriff spat. "She's Comanche. That's armed enough." Jonah raised a brow. "She's a child. She's a warning." Jonah didn't reply. The blacksmith's wife whispered near the well. A store hand dropped a crate when Jonah passed. Suspicion crackled in the air like dry grass waiting for a match. At the general store, the clerk lowered his voice. "You best send her on. Folks are nervous. Preacher says there's signs of a raid brewing, livestock gone, tracks in the hills. You shelter her, they'll think you chose a side." Jonah didn't respond. He paid in coin and took his sack. As he walked back, clouds gathered thick and that night she sat on the porch while Jonah carved a bit of pine. The fire inside crackled low, untouched. She watched the sky, not him. After a long silence, she spoke. One word. "Jonah." His hand stopped. He looked up, startled. "How'd you know my name?" She tapped her ear, then pointed to her lips. Then she mouthed the word again. "Jonah." He smiled faintly. "Can't speak, but you listen better than most folks who can." She tilted her head, curious, a question in her eyes. He shrugged. "I talk to the wind sometimes, maybe it told you." She chuckled, just barely, a sound like leaves brushing stone. On the 8th day, she did not wake at dawn. Jonah found her curled in hay, shivering. Fever. He carried her to the cabin despite her weak protests. She was light. Too light. He placed her gently on the cot where his wife once slept and closed the door to keep the wind out. He boiled roots, applied salve, sat by the fire as she slept. Once she stirred and whispered something in her own tongue, a word he couldn't understand. He didn't try to translate it. It sounded like grief. By evening she woke. The fever had broken. She sat up, eyes bleary, and looked around the room. Her gaze rested on a small carved figure beside the fire, a tiny wooden horse barely finished. She picked it up and studied it, then looked at Jonah. "Yours?" she asked. He shook his head. "Yours now." She held it in her palm like it was something sacred. But peace never holds in a place like this. That night, Jonah saw the firelight flicker unnaturally across the walls. He stepped outside and froze. The hill was lined with torches, dozens of riders, silent, still, waiting, painted faces, spears tipped with bone, horses clad in feathers and leather, warriors, 100 strong, spread across the prairie like Judgment Day itself. At the front, a figure stepped forward, older, commanding, eyes like obsidian and thunder. The girl stood beside Jonah now. She stepped past him, barefoot on the cold earth, and looked toward the man. She raised her hand, not to wave, to sign. Jonah watched, stunned. Her fingers moved slow and deliberate, like language carved from silence. The man watched her, unmoved. Then, slowly, he dismounted. The warriors behind him did not follow. The girl turned to Jonah. "He is my father," she said softly. Jonah's jaw tightened. The torches burned brighter now. The air was thick with something unspoken. The wind shifted again. This time it smelled like rain and blood. The Comanche riders did not attack. Not that night. They vanished before the first light of dawn, as if they'd never been there. Not even hoofprints left in the hard prairie dirt. Only the wind remained, brushing through the grass like fingers across a burial shroud. She hadn't spoken since. Not even to Jonah. For 3 days she sat on the edge of the barn roof, legs drawn, up wooden horse clutched tight in her hand, watching the horizon, waiting for something. A signal. A return. Forgiveness. But no one came back. Rumors bloomed in Dry Willow like rot. The blacksmith's son swore he saw Jonah signal the Comanche that night. The preacher's wife said she caught the girl drawing strange markings in the dirt behind the church. When a rancher's calf turned up gutted, it didn't take much for folks to connect imaginary dots. The sheriff had no proof, but suspicion needs no proof in a town like Dry Willow. She walked into town on the fourth morning barefoot again, pale, weak. Jonah tried to stop her. Not now. They're ready to hang shadows out there. But she shook her head. She wanted something. She wasn't sure what. She made it halfway down Main Street before the first rock hit her, small but sharp. She flinched, looked up. A second hit her shoulder, then a third catching her jaw. Children scattered behind crates and barrels, giggling nervously. Their parents watched, did nothing. She stumbled, righted herself. Blood welled along her cheek again, tracing the same old scar. The sheriff stepped out from behind the saloon. "That's far enough, girl." She didn't stop. He moved forward, hand on his pistol. "I said that's far enough." Jonah rode into town a few minutes later. By then she was already locked in the church cellar. They called it protective holding. Said it was for her safety and the town's. Said she was unstable. Said they'd let her go when they were sure she wasn't inviting danger. But Jonah had seen cells before, and this was one. He visited her that night. The cellar was cold, damp. She sat on a folded sack of oats, arms wrapped around her knees, staring at the floor. The small window near the ceiling let in only slivers of moonlight. He didn't speak, just slid down the wall opposite her and sat. Minutes passed. She finally looked at him. "I should have left," she signed slowly, fingers trembling. "You could have," he said. "You didn't. They hate me. They fear you." "Same thing." He didn't argue. She looked at the wood carving he held. The tiny horse. He set it down gently between them. "They said, I brought danger," she whispered. "But I ran from it." He met her eyes. "I know." She didn't cry. Not in front of him. But that night after he left, the preacher heard a soft sound through the floorboards. A sound like a breath breaking open. The next morning she was gone. No tracks, no note. Just the small horse left sitting outside the church. Door, you're facing west. Jonah knew where she'd go. He rode hard. The North Hills were cruel this time of year. Wind-scoured, brittle with ice. Tracks were faint, but there. She wasn't running. Not exactly. Just walking. Walking fast. Walking away from the people who broke her spirit one whisper at a time. He found her just after dusk, collapsed near a dry creek bed, her body curled, into herself like a child trying to disappear. He didn't shout, didn't run. He just stepped down, knelt beside her, and draped his coat across her back. She stirred weakly, didn't speak. "Stay," he said softly. "That's all. Just stay." He built a fire beside her, small and steady, cooked coffee, broke bread. She didn't eat much, but she stayed near the warmth. As the stars broke open above them, she finally whispered, "They sent him away, my father." Jonah didn't answer. "I failed." He looked at her. "You survived." She turned toward him, tears now drawing lines through dirt and ash on her face. He said, "When the moon was high, they would return for me. But I didn't wait. I thought I could find peace. I thought someone could see me, not as a war sign or a ghost, just as a girl. You were right. No, I was foolish. You were human." She studied him. The firelight drew shadows along his worn face, the lines of sorrow and silence too familiar to her own. "You lost someone." He nodded. "My wife. And our baby. Winter fever. The town never saw her die, just saw me bury her." She nodded. "They forget the pain, but they never forget the fear." He chuckled faintly. "You said that better than any preacher I've heard." They didn't speak much after that. But in the morning, when the wind softened and the sky turned rose and silver, she reached for his hand, not to be saved, but to be seen. He helped her to her feet, not as a hero, but as someone who stayed. They walked back toward Dry Willow together, and the prairie, for the first time in weeks, was still. The winter passed like a long-held breath, slow, reluctant, cold. But spring came all the same, not in fanfare, not in blossoms or bird calls, but in the dirt softening beneath Jonah's boots, in the way the creek behind the cabin began to run again, in how she started to braid her hair in the mornings instead of letting it fall over her face. She still didn't talk much, but she moved. She rose early, fed the chickens, patched the roof, mended an old saddle without asking. When Jonah returned from town one day, he found the fence fully repaired and a new gate hanging straight. He didn't say thank you. She didn't need him to. On the 7th day of thaw, they built a paddock. Together. It wasn't anything fancy. Rough-hewn timber, rusted nails, railings patched with leather straps. But it held. And when Jonah brought home a mare too old for labor but too proud for slaughter, she smiled for the first time in weeks. "This one," she signed, stroking the horse's neck. "We name her Smoke." Jonah grinned. "Smoke it is." The townsfolk still whispered. They didn't come out to the cabin anymore, not after Jonah warned off the sheriff with a loaded rifle and a dead stare. Word spread. Folks stopped asking questions. But the space between the cabin and Dry Willow grew wider, heavier. He didn't mind. She seemed to like it that way. By mid-spring, they had more than just the horse. 2 hens, a skittish goat, a few tools traded from a trapper. One night, Jonah cooked rabbit stew over the fire while she sat carving beside the hearth. Her fingers shaped the wood slowly, precisely. A horse again. This one smaller than the first, but with finer lines and more care. When she finished, she held it out. "For you," she said softly. Jonah took it. The weight of it surprised him. "You carved this?" She nodded. "It's perfect," he said. She gave a small smile. "Not perfect. Just made with care." The next morning, he found her in the barn, tears running down her cheeks. She held a letter in her hands, one that hadn't been there the night before. Jonah took it gently. The seal was familiar. The sheriff's. He read it once, then again. His jaw tightened. "They're calling a town council," he said flatly. "They want to make it official. Ban any hostile blood from settling within a day's ride of Dry Willow." She looked up, eyes rimmed red. "They mean me." He nodded. She looked down. "Then I should go." He stepped forward. "Don't. I don't belong here. You belong somewhere. Not in a place that hates what I am." Jonah swallowed hard. "We'll fight it." She shook her head. "You'll lose." "Then I'll lose with you." They didn't speak the rest of the day. She worked the soil behind the barn, her shoulders hunched, her hands raw. He mended the door frame, his hammer strikes harder than they needed to be. That night, she didn't eat. He didn't press her. The following week, Dry Willow posted the notice publicly. "Any known tribal affiliates or sympathizers will be turned away. Harboring will be punished." Jonah rode into town alone, stared down the preacher, the sheriff, and every man who looked his way. "She's got a name," he said, "and a place now, and if you want to take it, you'd better bring more than law. Bring fire." They didn't answer. Cowards rarely do. He came home to find her packing. Not clothes. Memories, the wood carvings. A faded bundle of cloth wrapped around beads, a bit of charcoal, and the horse's old bridle. She looked at him. "I won't let you burn for me." He stepped forward slowly. "I already have." She paused, eyes wide. "I lost my wife," he said. "Not just to fever, to silence. I never told her what I feared, what I felt, and by the time I realized, she was too far gone." He placed the small horse carving into her hand. "You walked into my life like a storm, but you made it whole again." She blinked hard. "I can't ask you to choose," she whispered. "You don't have to." They decided to stay, to stand. Together they cleared more land, laid stones for a larger barn, planted seeds behind the house, corn, beans, even 2 scraggly apple saplings. She marked the entrance to the property with feathers tied in a circle of braided grass. He carved a sign, "Smoke's Hollow." Then came the final challenge, not from the town, from his past. A rider came through one afternoon, lean, dust-worn, grinning like a man with a secret he planned to sell. "Jonah Kale," he drawled. "Thought you was dead." Jonah stepped forward, stiff. "What do you want, Miles?" The man glanced toward the barn. "Heard you was keeping company with a wild girl. Thought maybe you forgot who you were." "I haven't." "Then maybe you remember Abilene." Jonah's face darkened. The girl stepped beside him, wary. Miles tipped his hat. "Ask him what happened. Ask him how the fire started. Ask him who walked away while folks burned." Jonah clenched his jaw. "You lied to them. You let me." The silence between them cracked like thunder. Later that night, she asked him quietly, "What happened in Abilene?" Jonah stared into the fire. "I was young, desperate, rode with a crew that promised justice, but they wanted blood. They called it retribution. I watched a barn go up with 3 children inside. I didn't start the fire, but I didn't stop it. I ran." She looked down. "Why didn't you stop them?" "Because I was a coward." She didn't speak. He swallowed. You still want to go?" She lifted her eyes. "No," she said. "I want to build." The next morning, they worked in the sun, side by side, with sweat and soil under their nails and purpose in their bones. Not to forget, but to remember with intention. And when the wind rose again, not as threat, but as promise, it carried the scent of earth, smoke, and something more. Home. They summoned him at dawn. A messenger from Dry Willow, nervous and pale, rode up the dirt path with a crumpled letter and a sheriff's seal. Jonah read it twice, then folded it carefully. She didn't ask. She saw it in his face. That quiet tightening around the jaw, the kind that meant history was calling. He stood by the barn fence, staring out toward the distant hills. "They want me to come alone," he said. "One last hearing. Decide if I stay. If you stay." She looked down. "We know what they'll say." He nodded. "But I need to hear it out loud." He left Smoke's Hollow near mid-morning, but he didn't go alone. The walk into Dry Willow was slow, not because of fear, because of choice. Every step he took beside her said, "I don't hide anymore." They passed the old well, the chapel, the store with its shuttered windows. People watched through cracked doors and lifted curtains. No one spoke. At the town square, the sheriff waited, arms folded, a circle of townsfolk behind him like a jury made of dust and memory. Jonah stopped. The girl beside him didn't flinch. The sheriff cleared his throat. "You were warned. We gave you grace. And still, you brought her back into this place." "She never left," Jonah said. The preacher spoke next. "She carries danger with her. You know that." Jonah's voice was calm. "So do you." Murmurs passed through the crowd. An old woman stepped forward. The one who once gave the girl a crust of bread years ago, then looked away as rocks were thrown. "She's not one of us," she said, not cruelly, just plainly. The girl finally stepped forward. "I never asked to be," she said. Her voice cracked, but she kept it steady. "I came here because I wanted to build something that didn't bleed. I didn't come to fight, but I won't run anymore." The wind shifted. Dust lifted off the square in slow swirls. Jonah reached into his coat. Some flinched, but what he pulled out wasn't a weapon. It was a horse carving. He held it up high. "I gave her this," he said, "because she gave me back my life. You don't have to accept her, but I will not leave her behind." He turned to her, and in front of every man and woman in Dry Willow, he knelt, not with a ring, but with open hands. "I choose you. Here. Now. Forever." No one applauded, but no one stopped him either. They walked back to the edge of town, side by side, At the old tree near the ridge, she paused. He turned. "You all right?" She nodded, then looked back once. At the roofs, the people, the life that never welcomed her. She didn't wave. She didn't spit. She simply whispered, "Goodbye," and the wind carried it away. A year passed. Smoke's hollow grew. The barn was bigger. The apple trees bore blossoms. Smoke gave birth to a colt with a crooked leg and a wild spirit. They named him Ash. One night, as spring broke open across the land, they stood outside beneath a wide sky of stars. He held her hand. She rested her head on his shoulder. No ceremony, no preacher, just two souls wrapped in silence and starlight. And above them, the universe bore witness. Closing lines. And that's how a man burned his past to build a future. How a girl outcast by blood became the roots of a home. And how love, quiet and steadfast, outlived every whisper that tried to kill it. Now that you've heard her story, I'd love to know, what did it make you feel? Did something in her journey stay with you? Let me know in the comments. Your words mean more than you know.